I'm a 27-year-old woman, and I used to believe that if I kept everything together, straight A's, polished clothes, perfect manners, I could control how the world saw me. That's how my mother raised me. In her words, I was a reflection of her, and no reflection of hers was allowed to look weak. Ever. We lived in a small Connecticut town that practically ran on appearances. My mother was the head of human resources for a big insurance firm, always dressed in tailored suits, always ready with a smile that looked more like a warning than a greeting. My father died when I was 8, of a sudden heart attack. She didn't cry at the funeral. She just held my hand tighter than usual and kept nodding when people said she was strong. After that, everything in our house became tighter. We went in, quieter, cleaner. I wasn't allowed to throw tantrums or talk back or fall apart because my mother was doing it all on her own, and she didn't have time for weakness. When I did cry, she gave me a tissue but didn't hug me. If I got sick, she told me to sleep it off. Her love wasn't cold. It was clinical. In high school, I played the game better than anyone. I was the captain of the debate team, editor of the school paper, president of student council, AP classes, volunteer work, all of it. My college tuition was covered by scholarships and people told me I was going places. But none of them knew I couldn't sleep at night unless I had tomorrow's to-do list planned down to the minute. Sophomore year of college, everything cracked. I was juggling a brutal summer internship at a marketing firm that made me feel like a ghost, keeping up a perfect GPA, and pretending everything was fine while I spiraled through depression I hadn't even admitted to myself. The panic attacks started slowly, one on the subway, one in the bathroom at work, but by September, I couldn't make it through a lecture without shaking. I collapsed in the student union bathroom one afternoon and woke up in the campus health clinic. I took a medical leave. It felt like admitting defeat. But the real knockout came when I told my mother. I expected a lecture. I expected disappointment. I didn't expect the word she used. You're becoming a liability, Nora. That word landed harder than any breakdown. I still remember the way she said it, not in anger, but in annoyance. Like I had broken a vase. Like I had embarrassed her at a company party. The next day, I packed 2 suitcases and moved in with my friend Ellie, who lived in New Haven. I changed my number, filtered my mother's emails to archive, and told Ellie not to give out my address to anyone related to me. For the next 2 years, I tried to build a version of myself that wasn't for show. I worked part-time at a used bookstore, took night classes at a community college, and spent more hours in therapy than I ever spent in class. I learned what my actual voice sounded like when I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I got a remote research gig for a retail company. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the rent and let me breathe. Then I applied for a data analyst position at a mid-sized tech company in Boston, and got it. I signed a lease for a small studio apartment and bought a cheap but sturdy couch off Facebook Marketplace. I didn't tell anyone in my family. I didn't send a postcard or a text. My therapist called it a boundary. I called it survival. One day during our session, my therapist suggested I write a letter to my mother, not to rekindle anything, just to say the things I needed to say. I wrote it in one sitting. I told her how her silence when Dad died left me alone in a room full of people. I told her how being useful became my entire personality. And I told her that calling me a liability felt like the final proof that I had never really been a daughter to her. Just a resume. I mailed it. I didn't expect anything. 3 weeks later, my Aunt Melissa called. I hadn't spoken to her in years. She told me my mother read the letter with a straight face and then folded it and put it in her drawer. No tears. No reply. Just storage. Like I was something she didn't want to look at, but couldn't throw away. I moved to Boston shortly after. New job, new city, no family ties. I joined a weekend hiking group just to force myself to talk to strangers again. I started going to a local cafe where the barista remembered my order. I didn't feel healed, but I finally felt like I belonged somewhere, even if it was just in a room with plants I kept alive myself. Then, out of nowhere, I got a call from a law office. The woman on the phone told me she was my mother's estate lawyer. My mother had been diagnosed with early onset Parkinson's. Her condition was progressing faster than expected, and I was listed as her emergency contact. No one else. Just me. She wanted to see me. It had been nearly 3 years since I last heard her voice. Back when I was younger, she used to insist I was the only one who never lost their head in a crisis. Now she was sick, and suddenly I was the one she needed. That was the moment everything I built, my job, my apartment, my peace, started shaking again. And I hadn't even called her back yet. I agreed to meet her at the medical center in Hartford. It was a cold, gray morning, and she was already seated when I arrived, back straight, blazer sharp, but her hands trembled as she folded them over her lap. Her hair was thinner, and her shoes didn't match her handbag. That would have never happened before. The neurologist explained her condition in measured terms: Parkinson's with rapid progression, early signs of cognitive decline, risk of falls. He showed me scan results and medication plans while she sat quietly, nodding every few seconds. I asked questions, took notes, and made sure to never look at her for too long. After the appointment, she reached into her bag and pulled out a folder, thick with paperwork. Inside were insurance documents, a full copy of her medical history, and a power of attorney form with my name typed in bold. She had signed it a week before. I flipped through it and asked, why me? She adjusted the sleeve of her blouse and said she didn't trust anyone else to stay calm under pressure. That was it. No apology. No acknowledgement of what happened between us. Just that. I slid the folder back into my tote and told her I'd look over everything. We didn't hug. Outside the building, I called Aunt Melissa to confirm the diagnosis. She already knew. What she didn't know was that I had been listed as my mother's emergency contact months ago. She didn't hide her concern. Melissa warned me not to assume this was about reconciliation. She's always had a reason for everything, she said. Back in Boston, I started organizing things like a project plan. I built a shared folder for her lab results and imaging reports, made a spreadsheet for medications and refill dates, set up recurring reminders for her physical therapy. I coordinated her pharmacy pickups with her home nurse and emailed her neurologist for appointment summaries. I didn't speak to her unless something needed to be addressed. I emailed her weekly calendars in bullet format. She responded with short texts, half-typed updates full of typos and autocorrect fails, sometimes ending with a random crying face emoji or a thumbs up. Her hands were clearly struggling with the phone. Then the calls started. At first they were about logistics, prescription mix-ups, questions about appointments. Then came calls that didn't have a purpose. She would start a sentence and forget how to finish it, or she would ask a question, then go quiet before I answered. I kept my tone neutral. I gave her answers, and then I'd say I needed to go. One afternoon, she asked if I remembered the lullaby she used to hum to me when I was little. I paused. I told her I didn't. She let out a soft laugh, then hung up. I met with my therapist that same week and went over what had changed. She asked if I was okay taking this on. I told her I wasn't, but I was doing it anyway. We discussed boundaries, and I set them in stone. No overnight stays, no unplanned visits, no emotional conversations. If it wasn't medical or necessary, it didn't get space in my day. She called once to ask if I could stay the weekend after her second round of physical therapy, just in case she had another bad spell. I declined and arranged for a visiting nurse instead. I didn't explain myself. She didn't argue. A month in, I met with her estate attorney again, this time for documents I had to sign in person. I found out she had also given me control over some financial decisions, hospital payments, long-term care planning, insurance appeals. Her bank had my name added as a co-signer for medical use only. I asked the attorney if she had mentioned why she hadn't told anyone else in the family. Apparently, she didn't think anyone else could handle it. I contacted her insurance company to push through a reimbursement backlog. I negotiated a better rate with her physical therapist. I ordered grip-friendly utensils for her kitchen and a new pair of non-slip shoes because I saw the tread peeling off the ones she wore in Hartford. She never thanked me. One evening, I got a message from her that just said, "Window open again. Cold." I called the nurse to check on her. The nurse found the window latched but said she'd stay an extra hour just in case. The next day, I arranged for someone to check on the apartment's insulation. Melissa texted me a few days later. She told me what you've been doing. I don't know how you're managing all this. Are you sure you're okay? I didn't respond. I just forwarded her the appointment calendar and added her to the email thread. If my mother needed anything when I wasn't available, Melissa could step in. The calls kept coming. Some were late at night. Sometimes she'd just breathe for a while, then hang up. I never blocked her. I didn't pick up every time either. I kept it like everything else in my life, measured, compartmentalized, and clean. But something about those calls, it wasn't just the tremor or the memory slips. It was the silence that sat in the middle of every sentence. It's like she knew she needed me, but she didn't know me anymore. At 6 a.m., my phone lit up with a call from the hospital. My mother had fallen in the shower and was being held for observation. The nurse said she was conscious but confused. I packed an overnight bag and drove the 2.5 hours from Boston without stopping. When I reached the emergency room, she was sitting on a gurney, draped in a paper-thin hospital gown. Her hair was wet, her left wrist bruised, and her expression blank until she saw me. Then she blinked fast like she wasn't sure if I was real. Her hand reached out, shaking. I let her take mine. I didn't squeeze back. The fall hadn't caused any major injuries, just some swelling, a mild concussion, and a spike in her blood pressure. But the doctors were worried about her confusion and balance. She kept forgetting what day it was and asking where her car was, even though she hadn't driven in months. I stayed in the lounge that night, charging my laptop, forwarding insurance forms, and calling her case manager to speed up the referral for a rehabilitation consult. Every nurse and tech who walked in looked at me like I was the devoted daughter who dropped everything to be there. I didn't correct them. But the role felt like I had borrowed someone else's skin for the day. That night, I opened her patient portal and combed through her medication history. 2 of her prescriptions were being filled at different pharmacies, and she was missing scheduled doses. Notes in her chart mentioned weight loss and possible malnutrition. I called a homemade service the next morning and hired someone to assist with personal care and light cleaning for 4 hours a day. I also set up a weekly meal plan delivery with heat and eat options tailored for Parkinson's patients. After she was discharged, I rode in the transport van with her to her apartment. Her aide arrived later that evening. I installed new grip bars in the shower, replaced the bath mat with a non-slip version, and swapped out every expired item in her fridge. She shuffled into the kitchen while I was labeling containers. Her voice cracked when she called me Nora Bear. That name hadn't touched air in 17 years. I kept writing labels and didn't look up. Later that week, she asked if I remembered how she used to read Anne of Green Gables to me on snow days. I told her no. Another lie. She used to change her voice for every character. The following Monday, I requested a full safety assessment of her apartment. Within days, the landlord approved small adjustments, railings in the hallway, brighter motion-activated lights, a shower chair. The aide texted me a photo of the new setup once everything was in. One afternoon, while I was dropping off a blood pressure monitor, the aide pointed at a framed picture in the living room. It was my high school graduation photo. She smiled and said she'd guessed I was the one who'd gone to university. I nodded but didn't say anything else. Aunt Melissa called again to check in. She offered to take on some of the responsibilities, maybe alternate medical calls or pharmacy runs. I thanked her but turned it down. I had built this system brick by brick, and I didn't want another pair of hands rearranging it, not even hers. My boss approved a hybrid work schedule after I explained the medical situation in vague terms. I found a temporary sublet just 30 minutes away from my mother's apartment. It wasn't permanent. I made sure the lease was month to month, but it meant I could manage things faster without missing too much work. She asked one night why I was doing all of this. I was placing her new medication blister pack in the kitchen drawer at the time. I said, because it needs to be done. That was all. She didn't ask again. She tried apologizing once. Her voice caught in her throat before she could finish the sentence. I cut her off by placing the pill bottle in her hand and reminding her to take it before bed. She nodded like she understood, but I wasn't sure if she did. After her next neurology appointment, I realized something. Every appointment, every delivery, every signature, every reminder, everything that kept her life running, it came from me. And without my emails, she didn't get her meds. Without my calls, her physical therapist didn't show. Without my check-ins, her fridge stayed empty. She once called me a liability. Now, I was the only reason her life still functioned. And not because she deserved it, not because she changed, but because I knew how to build systems, track details, and solve problems. And this, her life, had become a problem I was solving, one entry on a checklist at a time. The neurologist referred her for speech therapy after noticing the slurring had become more frequent. The sessions were twice a week, 30 minutes each, in a rehab center 3 towns over. I added them to her calendar and adjusted my hybrid workdays to handle transport. She struggled with the mouth exercises but insisted on going in person rather than doing virtual appointments. When her hands started locking up mid-task, she couldn't sign her name anymore, not for prescriptions, not for banking. I had to file a legal proxy form and submit copies to her pharmacy, insurance, and bank. Every time I walked into those places, people assumed I was her daughter doing the right thing. I let them think that. To keep things separate, I got a second phone line just for managing her appointments, deliveries, and emergencies. I left her original contacts blocked on my real number and didn't update her about it. She still called the care line and left voicemails with updates or sometimes nothing but the sound of the television in the background. She started making meal requests, dishes from my childhood, lentil stew with fried onions, her slow-cooked rice with cinnamon sticks. I hadn't made those in years. I cooked them out of habit and dropped them off once or twice a week. She always finished every bite. One morning, the aide was running late due to traffic, and she called me crying. She thought she was having a heart attack but couldn't explain the symptoms. I drove over with my second phone still ringing in my lap. She was fine, just a panic attack. Her chest was tight, and her speech was scrambled. I sat with her until the aide arrived, then went back to work from the car. Later that month, her insurance lapsed because the auto payment failed, and she missed 2 reminders. I didn't find out until the pharmacy flagged her file as inactive. I spent 3 hours that night on hold between customer service and billing. The last rep didn't finish fixing it until nearly 2 a.m. I sent her a printout of the updated coverage the next morning and made sure all future payments came from a new joint account I created to avoid further issues. One of her old coworkers, someone named Julie, contacted me through a mutual connection. She asked if I could talk some sense into my mother about selling her condo and moving to assisted living. I declined, telling I didn't know Julie, and my mother hadn't mentioned her once in the last decade. I made a note to block the number if she called again. While sorting her medication drawer, I found a crumpled note with uneven handwriting on the back of a receipt. It read, "Nora made the soup today. It was perfect." I didn't mention it. At my next therapy session, the therapist asked if I felt emotionally blackmailed. I stared at the carpet and said I wasn't sure what that meant anymore. On a Sunday night, as I was going over her prescriptions, she asked if I'd stay in the guest room just this once. I told her I had an early meeting and left after filling her pill box and checking the fridge for leftovers. When I got to the car, I saw the porch light flash on and off like it used to when I was a teenager out past curfew. Over the next few weeks, I noticed something odd. She had started displaying pictures of me in the living room, school plays, prom, high school graduation. I hadn't seen most of those photos in over a decade. The aide said she had started showing them to visitors and bragging about me working in the tech industry. Then came the invitation to a wedding. A cousin I hadn't seen since I was 13 was getting married in the city. She said she didn't want to go alone and asked if I'd escort her. I agreed but kept the visit short. She wore a navy dress that didn't quite zip up and asked for help with the clasp. I fixed it, then fixed her scarf to cover the spot. At the reception, a distant uncle clapped me on the shoulder and said it was so beautiful to see a mother and daughter stay close. All these years. I smiled and nodded. There wasn't anything else to say. Back at her apartment, she asked me to help her out of her shoes. She sat on the couch, pulling her sweater sleeves over her hands like she used to when she was cold. She looked at the wall for a while, then started crying. Not loud, not dramatic, just steady tears. She apologized. It wasn't the same flat tone as last time. She stumbled through the words but got them out. Then she asked if there was any way she could fix things between us. I didn't respond. I reached behind her, placed the heating pad against her lower back, and adjusted the dial. Then I said, "Let's get you to bed." She asked if we could start having weekly dinners, just the 2 of us. I agreed, on the condition that they happened in public, neutral places with menus and noise and check-ins from waitstaff. I picked the spots carefully, small, quiet diners with no family history attached. The second dinner, she surprised me. She brought up my decision to leave college, not with criticism, but by calling it one of her biggest failures. Her tone didn't match anything I remembered. She said she should have noticed the signs, that she had been more worried about what people at her job would think than what was actually happening to me. I didn't say much. I let her talk. It occurred to me later that she didn't know where I worked. I tested it. I told her I was in tech consulting. She nodded like she understood, but her eyes drifted. She didn't ask what company, didn't ask what I actually did. I don't think she had any idea. The following week, she handed me a photo album wrapped in tissue paper. Inside were scanned copies of old report cards, gold stars, crayon drawings of stick figure families. Some pages were torn and taped back together. I recognized one with my 4th grade science fair ribbon still attached. One evening, I arrived early to drop off her prescription refills. Her front door was unlocked, and I found her sitting on the couch, watching something on her laptop. She closed it quickly when she saw me. I recognized the pause screen. It was one of our old home videos. I left the bag of medications on the table and didn't bring it up. That same week, I got an email from a Boston-based tech firm I had applied to months ago and forgotten about. They wanted to interview me for a senior consultant role. Higher pay, bigger team, relocation package included. I debated deleting the email. Then I booked the interview and told no one. At dinner the next week, she asked if she could visit my apartment someday. I told her it wasn't accessible for her needs. That part was true. Lots of stairs, narrow halls, no elevator. She nodded but didn't ask again. Another time, she asked what I remembered most about my father. I told her it was the day he taught me to ride a bike in the church parking lot. Ow, he clapped when I finally stayed upright. She sat quietly for a second before telling me that it was actually her who taught me. I didn't argue. I just let the silence stretch. Maybe I remembered it the way I wanted to. Soon, I noticed something strange. When I'd leave after a visit, I'd find letters in my bag. Folded notes she never mentioned. One talked about the books we used to read. One was a list of things she remembered about my childhood. One just said, "I never knew what it meant to be strong until I watched you handle me." I never brought up the letters, and neither did she. The pale blue sweater I gave her last winter, the one she once told me was too soft for her style, started showing up more often. I saw her wearing it while she sat on the porch, sipping soup, even once in a photo the homemaid sent me. I didn't comment. At doctor appointments and the pharmacy, she began introducing me as her daughter again. It's not my emergency contact or my caregiver. That's daughter. I didn't correct her, but I noticed that I had stopped calling her anything at all. Not mom, not even her name. I just spoke in directions, take this with water, sign here, follow up in 2 weeks. One morning while I helped her open a prescription bottle, she asked, "When you were gone, where did you go?" I told her I had to disappear to survive. She nodded and said, "Fair." The Boston firm sent an offer. It included moving assistance, a company apartment for the first 3 months, and a flexible start date. I reviewed the contract, signed it, and scheduled the onboarding meeting for the following Monday. I hadn't told her yet, but I knew the day was coming when I would. The last box of soup containers was already packed. I waited a full week before telling her about the job offer. I wanted everything set first, lease signed, contract finalized, moving truck scheduled. When I finally sat across from her at dinner and told her I was relocating, she dropped her fork. Her voice cracked, asking how far. I gave her the city and the distance. She blinked a few times like she was trying to convert miles into months. She asked if I was leaving to get away from her. I said no. I told her I was taking the job because I earned it, because I wanted it, because it had nothing to do with her. She didn't argue, not directly, but the next morning she called early, saying she felt unsafe. Said her tremors had gotten worse, saying that she wasn't sleeping well, that she didn't trust the aide with the stove. I offered to hire a full-time care manager. She rejected the idea outright. "They're not you." I reminded her I wasn't a nurse or a caregiver by trade. She said that didn't matter, that the house didn't feel right without me coming and going, that her days were getting longer. Aunt Melissa volunteered to step in more, said she could stop by a few times a week, manage appointments, even stay over if needed. My mother refused. Said it wasn't the same. "You're the one who rebuilt everything," she told me. At her next doctor's appointment, the neurologist suggested she try cognitive behavioral therapy to help with her increasing emotional dependence. She dismissed it before he finished the sentence. She asked if I had put him up to it. I hadn't. He just saw the same pattern everyone else was beginning to notice. I visited that weekend to drop off a new batch of pre-sorted pill organizers and to review her emergency contact updates with the care team. When I opened her closet to check for a fall mat, I saw that she'd reorganized everything by color, shirts, scarves, even socks. I used to do that as a teenager. She used to mock me for it. While I was putting the groceries in the fridge, she started talking about the letter I sent her years ago, the one after I'd cut contact. She said she'd kept it on her nightstand for months. That she never responded because she didn't know how. That she waited in silence, hoping I'd just walk through the door again. I reminded her I didn't walk back into her life for emotional closure. I came because her world was falling apart, and she listed me as her emergency contact. I didn't raise my voice. I just said it like it was. The night before my move, she handed me a small box wrapped in tissue paper. Inside was a silver necklace I hadn't seen in years. The one I wore every day in middle school, until the chain snapped. She'd gotten it repaired. I said, "Thank you," and placed it in my bag. Before I left, she asked for my new address. I wrote it down on a sticky note. I knew she wouldn't use it, not because she didn't want to, but because she wouldn't know how to. She called 3 times during the drive. I let all 3 go to voicemail. The 4th time, she left a message. "You saved my life. And I don't even know yours anymore." My new apartment was small but quiet. The windows faced an alley and the heating clicked at night, but it was mine. I unpacked her box last. The repaired necklace sat on top of a folded dish towel. It didn't fit anymore. I placed it in a drawer with a copy of the power of attorney paperwork. I got a new phone number 2 days after I moved in. I kept the care line active for her nurse, pharmacy, and aides. She still thinks that number belongs to me. Sometimes she leaves voicemails for Nora, and I forward them to the care coordinator without listening to them all the way through. I updated the voicemail greeting on my real number. "This is Nora. I'm not available right now." For the first time, it didn't feel like a lie. 3 months into my new role in Boston, the silence became a kind of rhythm. My days were packed, back-to-back meetings, client calls, endless spreadsheets. My apartment was small and sparse, but everything had a place. The only voice that ever cracked the quiet was the automated alert on the care line or a voicemail from her nurse. Her messages started thinning out. Where she once called daily, now it was just 2 or 3 times a week. Sometimes the nurses left notes in the care log, "She asked for you today," or "She's asking less and less now." The tone felt clinical, but the meaning was clear. One of the nurses pulled me aside during a routine visit. She kept her voice low, but it was hard not to hear the weight behind it. My mother was showing signs of confusion more frequently, especially in the evenings, repeating questions. forgetting where she left simple things. They called it sundowning, common, but hard to watch. I made another trip when I got a call from the aide. My mother had wandered during their usual afternoon walk and froze outside a nearby florist shop, unable to recognize her own building. She looked panicked until she saw me pull up. She stared for a second, then smiled and called me sweetheart, not Nora. When I corrected her gently, she smiled again and said, I knew that, but the look in her eyes said otherwise. Before I left that day, I installed a digital frame beside her bed. I'd loaded it with old photos, some from birthdays, a few school recitals, one blurry but honest picture of us laughing while baking cookies. I arranged them in a loop so they'd never play in the same order twice. She nodded at the screen as the images shifted and then looked away. The next week, she called just to ask, was I ever good at being your mother? I paused for a beat, then said, sometimes, but not when it counted. She didn't argue. She didn't hang up. She just whispered, okay, and ended the call a minute later. A few days later, I received a letter in my mailbox. Her handwriting was worse than usual. Some words were scratched out, some didn't make sense. But the message still came through. It said, you gave me dignity when I gave you shame. I don't deserve your care, but I am grateful for it. I read it twice, then folded it, and placed it in the drawer with the necklace. And that letter didn't heal anything, but it closed a loop I hadn't realized I was still walking in. After that, I stopped checking the care logs every day. I stopped hoping she'd say something different. I wasn't waiting for a version of her that never existed. 2 weeks later, I met with a legal rep and signed the documents transferring full power of attorney to the care agency. They'd handle everything, medical decisions, finances, contacts. I wasn't disappearing. I was delegating. The weight wasn't mine to carry anymore. Aunt Melissa picked up the routine visits. She'd text updates occasionally. Your mother didn't ask for you this time, or she still watches that photo frame every night. I thanked her for the updates, but I stopped asking for more. For the first time in years, I started dating someone. Nothing serious at first. Just coffee, dinner, slow weekends. He knew my story. Not every detail, but enough to understand why I sometimes went quiet when people mentioned parents. And for once, I didn't feel like I had to apologize for any of it. I wasn't damaged. I was rebuilding. One night, I sat at my desk and wrote a letter, not to send, just for myself. I kept it short. You taught me how to live by showing me what I'd never survive under. I folded it once and left it in the back of my journal. I haven't read it since. 6 months later, I got the call. She had passed in her sleep. Peaceful, the nurse said, no distress, no pain, just a soft slip into quiet. I booked a flight that same evening. At the funeral, there were 4 people. Me, Aunt Melissa, her nurse, and an old neighbor. No speeches, no music, just a plain box, a short service, and silence. I didn't cry. I didn't flinch. I just signed the last set of papers and gave Melissa a long hug before heading back to the airport. I didn't show up at her funeral because I forgave her. I showed up because I had nothing left to prove. I was never her burden. I was the one who kept her world upright when it started to fall apart. And when it was time, I let go. I was her anchor. But I refused to drown with her.